get as savvy as you can get, like whether you're going to school for it or if you're just kind of pursuing it on your own. So that way, like when you have the opportunity, like when an engineer or a producer or a studio responds to an email or a phone call that you're inquiring about an internship. So if you actually get that chance to get into a room and kind of interview for the internship, you could, bring some good stuff to the table and make it hard for them to say no. Persistent but not annoying.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Record Process. This week we are joined by engineer-producer Jay Zubricky. Now Jay is an incredibly talented guy in that space, but he's also an extremely genuine human being, as you'll find out from our interview. Jay stopped by to talk to us about his role in engineering the 2021 album SUP by Buffalo-based band Super American. But much like often happens here on The Record Process, we end up covering a lot more than just that record itself in talking about how it got made, what it was like for Jay getting there to that point in his career, and what he ultimately learned from the experience. His experiences also offer a ton of great insights on how to build professional relationships with other musicians in the studio, much like the one that he built with Pat and Matt from Super American. And finally, we spent some time talking about GRC Audio, a world-class recording facility that has an incredibly inspiring history all of its own. And it's all coming up right after this. So many of the albums that we'll be highlighting this season on The Record Process share one very important theme. And that's the idea of technology helping musicians and creators overcome the collaborative restrictions that once came along with geographic location. Thanks to companies like Audio Movers, real-time remote audio production and the tools that make it possible are more powerful than ever. Their groundbreaking Listen To plugin allows you to stream, record, and collaborate on high-quality audio in real time and is used on a daily basis by world-class audio engineers and professionals at places like Capitol and Abbey Road Studios. Their new Pro plan allows you to stream up to 150 users simultaneously, includes custom branding, and even allows you to stream MIDI data in real time. So head on over to audiomovers.com and enter the code RECORDPRO to get 1 month free off your Pro membership today. So as you already know, we do a lot of talking about the creation of original music here on The Record Process. I mean, that's kind of our thing. But it can also be fun to put your own spin on an old classic and tell the world something else about yourself through something like a cover song. Cover songs can be a really interesting way to connect with your existing fan base, or even a way to put yourself in front of new audiences through shared musical tastes. And our friends at DistroKid have made it super simple to upload a cover of your favorite song while allowing them to handle all of the back-end licensing work that can really be a headache for independent artists. DistroKid will notify the composer and publisher of its release, they will pay the necessary licensing fee, and they will take care of all the other legal red tape involved with releasing a cover song on a streaming platform, allowing you to fully focus on enjoying the process of putting your unique artistic spin on that recording. If you're already a DistroKid member, you can access this as you're uploading your track for $12 a year per song. Or if you're not yet a member and you'd like to sign up for DistroKid, you can use the link in our show notes to get 30% off of your first year's membership. Jay, welcome to The Record Process. We've been looking forward to this one as we were just talking. A lot of mutual friends and a lot of, even you were just working with Quentin Brock, a former guest of The Record Process, as recently as yesterday or this morning, rather. So
even technically this morning, yes.
Yeah. So we always love to see that when paths cross like that. But we asked you here because you work out of a really interesting. You're based out of Buffalo,
yes,
New York, and work out of a really interesting, really cool space up. We wanted you to talk not just about that and about the record, a specific record at hand that you cut there, but also about your journey coming up, because I think there's some interesting stories in there. And you played a lot of roles in learning about that and then coming into the space. So we did and will cover the album SUP by the band Super American at length that was released in 2021. But before we get there and get to that process, let's write the introduction. Let's start at chapter 1 and tell, for anybody that might not be familiar with your work and your journey as an engineer, producer, musician, right? Where did you start off? Have you always been in Buffalo, and what did the early days look like for you?
Yeah, I've been here my whole life, and the early days of recording, I went to a Catholic boys' high school that was pretty much like a sports kind of based school. And my sophomore year, they got a grant, and the grant had to be used for the arts. So there was like literally a floor on the school where like priests used to live, and it was vacant because they had since moved out. So they kind of saw that as an opportunity to turn it into a media arts center. And that included a recording studio with, your senior year of high school, you're able to take 2 like introduction to recording classes. And but the thing that was cool about it, it was like a Pro Tools based studio. The teacher was a working engineer, and so it wasn't like you were being taught concepts in recording by the science teacher or something. Like, it was an actual engineer who owned and operated the studio. So like my senior year, that was my first introduction into actually sitting in front of a computer that had Pro Tools on it, and I just got interested immediately. And I was playing in a crappy pop punk band at the time, and I was like,
hey, who's to say it was crappy? Okay,
99% of Buffalo.
The vast overwhelming majority weighed in.
Yes.
And the majority of people that weighed in at any given time. That's okay though. You needed that to get here, and that's what I always say. So you need those bad songs, you need the bad bands. That's also a testament. If you're in a band right now and you're maybe outside probably our average demographic and maybe younger than like 16 or 17, if you're in a band right now, trust me, take it from Jay, myself, that will probably not be your last band. We were all in bands before the one that actually took off at, and turned into a career. So that's some good stuff right at the jump. You know what I mean? You can still learn a lot and have a lot of fun.
Yeah, like you said, you got to have those moments. And I still have some of my closest friends are people I met during that era. So I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Right.
But, so I was interested in music just from doing that, and having access to a studio at my high school, it just showed me that, like, hey, I could sit down and actually record something. It didn't sound good, but I could actually just do the recording process. And so I ended up working at the high school studio for a couple years after I graduated. And they basically just gave me a set of keys. And I was, probably 19 when I started. And I was just bringing bands in on the nights and the weekends. I need downtime, and it was just bands I was playing with, friends, and cutting demos and stuff. That just kind of opened the door for me to get like my first internship or like whatever, like junior engineer apprenticeship kind of a thing at a professional studio in the area. I ended up working at that studio for about 5 years.
Oh, cool. What studio was that?
It was called Audio Magic, and it, Casey, I don't know if you ever played the Showplace Theater in Buffalo, but
it sounds very familiar. We may have.
Yeah.
If not, I definitely know of it. Yeah.
It had opened and closed a bunch of times over the years. So I don't know if you ever came through there, but it was right in the neighborhood with like a very popular venue at the time. And so that was where I got my first like internship and my ability to sit in with working engineers. Because up until that point, I was just kind of in this high school, guessing like, is this how you use a compressor? Let's go check a book, or,
Yeah.
So I was able to actually sit with engineers and, get some sort of, assistance, and they're able to teach me like, here's how you properly mic things, and here's why I'm doing this or that. And it turned into, a part-time job, I'd say, for about 5 years over there. While I held down just any sort of not so great job that I could just quit if I wanted to go, if a band was going to give me a chance to do a record and I couldn't get a week off of work. It was just jobs I didn't mind quitting.
Yeah. How many do you think you threw to the wayside in that period?
Not as many as I would think, but there was this one job that I kind of quit and went back to like 3 or 4 times. The first couple were like, all right, get out of here. Like, if you can't have availability, then let's get out of here. And then, there's probably like 3 or 4, but like the final one, the boss ended up being really cool. And was just like, yeah, man, just call me at the holidays and I'll bring you back for some seasonal work. And But yeah, I was doing that just because I don't know, I didn't care about those part-time jobs, and I really wanted
Yeah.
to learn about recording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just needed something that was a throwaway.
Yeah, it was a means to do that, and I think that's also I notice a pattern like that too. Is a lot of friends of ours and people in other bands, as they come up. I think looking for those jobs and then inevitably stumbling upon the one boss or employer that's, for lack of a better way to phrase it, highly flexible and forgiving
Yes.
Yeah.
in that way is really a true gem in terms of like I just wish I could reach out to all those like owners of pizza shops and or like whatever that are just like, hey, thank you for letting that person go on tour and share their music with people for an entire month, and then giving them a place to come back to and being like okay with it, and maybe just like razzing them a little bit for the first day or two back, because that goes a long way. I think it's maybe easier, a little bit easier now, because I think a lot of bands and artists have a number of other skill sets that can be utilized in a digital capacity. So a lot of people are working remotely, or it might be an artist that's a graphic designer or whatever. So I think that's also interesting, and very lucky to have stumbled upon that one at the end there that was kind of like, fool me once, shame on me, fool me four times. What are we doing here? I guess it's just a revolving door. But I think that's really important too. And so I wanted to highlight that, Jay, because I think, for anybody listening that might be in a similar position right now that knows they're curious and is just kind of maybe holding out and trying to learn the craft themselves, figure out a lot of these answers and just get some reps in while they're waiting for, looking for that kind of internship that you mentioned, which was the next place. I think that goes a long way. If you find that and you have that, even if it's not great, if it provides you some flexibility and understanding, that goes a long way. If you can find it, even if the pay is not that great, even if, whatever, it's like that alone can be really helpful in facilitating that. I'm curious too, then, because we get hit up a decent bit even at our spot. And I know a lot of other studio owners and friends, get a lot of emails inquiring, whether it be from local universities or, just high school kids or whatever about some kind of internship, like mentorship, looking for that. Right. And so I'm curious, how did you go about that, getting the internship? And if you have any advice maybe for people that are in a similar position, whether it's musicians that just want to learn the craft more and kind of shadow and be in a space, or, people that that are aspiring to be engineers and put on those production hats.
Yeah, my advice for that, it's actually changed over the years because I'm not sure what it is like state to state, but like in New York State, the labor laws have changed quite a bit. Like since I did my internship, which looking back then, it's just like wow, like that. There's a lot of stuff that probably isn't allowed under, what like a college would have in their book for this stuff. But so it's changed in recent years. But my advice would just be like first of all, get as savvy as you can get, like whether you're going to school for it or if you're just kind of pursuing it on your own. So that way, like when you have the opportunity, like when an engineer or a producer or a studio responds to an email or a phone call that you're inquiring about an internship. So if you actually get that chance to get into a room and kind of interview for the internship, you could, bring some good stuff to the table and make it hard for them to say no. Persistent but not annoying. Very fine line to walk there.
That's right. The squeaky wheel does get the grease, but sometimes you don't want the grease. Yeah. Depending on what grease they're giving you.
Yeah. And it's kind of like casting a big net with that stuff. Sometimes it's, your goal might be to get into a studio internship, but let's just say there's a venue in town that needs an intern for a little bit, and you basically work as like a stagehand. You know how it is, just meeting people who kind of work in a similar industry. There's just some sort of comfort that you find just by communicating with these people daily. So even if you have to do a little something else while you're still kind of shopping around for a studio internship, you basically you got to take it. And that's just more experience you could bring to the studio when they actually sit down and interview for the internship.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, and looking outside, not just narrowing your focus to it has to be a serious commercial studio facility, right? Venues, you can learn a ton about live sound, interacting with artists, their teams, their audio teams, their front of house guys, like, and a lot of people that are also musicians and maybe own studios or have their own home spaces, right? And that's and there's a lot of other things outside of that where you can get some pretty serious, good takeaways, still work and, still support yourself. But maybe that's the missing piece. Maybe, if none of the studios are accepting, have a program like that or are looking for assistance or things like that, maybe that's your way in a back door. I always talk about like thinking long term and having that kind of mindset, not just like, this is the exact next piece of the puzzle. Like I need to focus all my energy on that. It's like, maybe there's actually one step in between it or one or two dots between that and keeping that in mind. So that's a great point too, is to look outside maybe just the conventional, like that studio that I want to spend all my time in, because venues, you're going to do live recordings, live sound stuff, and you're going to learn a lot of what I wanted to also highlight that you said earlier, Jay, which was people telling you and unpacking the why behind what they're doing. Not just this is how you use this compressor, not just this is what mic you use, but the thought process that really goes a long way and is kind of what we sit every day on, with every episode on the show unpacking is ultimately the thought process of the decision making behind, well, this is why I chose to bring that person in, or why I chose to go there, or why we ended up doing this and it felt right. So that's actually maybe more important than where you go, is if you're finding yourself in a position where somebody is willing to not just say, use that one, give me that mic, give me that, if it's like if you're side by side with a surgeon and he never tells you why he's picking that scalpel or that whatever, you're not going to learn. But if he's willing to take the extra bit to be like, give me that one because this one has a better grip and a finer point, whatever, you're like, okay, you're learning, and you're learning in a way that you can go do things on your own later on, which is ultimately the goal.
Yeah, and awesome. Mostly like in every aspect, sound is sound. So, yeah, Jay, I love that you brought that up.
Yeah.
So you're at this internship, assistantship. Where do you go from there? What's next?
Yeah, like I said, I was there for about 5 years, and I ended up. That was like the first real studio that I worked at, and a large format console, a treated live room, an okay mic collection, and so I'm there for a while, and I started getting some, more work, but maybe a little bit better work at times, and so towards the end of my time there, the studio I work at now, which is called GCR Audio, at the time it was called Inner Machine Studios, and it was a private studio owned by the Goo Goo Dolls.
Buffalo royalty,
yes. But at that time, it was probably like summer of 2008. The studio manager over here, he had reached out to me and he just said, hey, we're aware of some of your work, and we just finished a full renovation of the studio. We're wondering if you want to come over, check it out, and just maybe have a meeting. And my response was, you know what? Thank you for hitting me up. I'm okay. I'll just talk to you some other time.
Oh.
And he was like, wait, really? And I'm really loyal to everybody in my life. I'm really loyal. And I kind of looked at the other studio as like, wow, these guys gave me a chance, and they took me under their wing, and there's amazing people. And I was just kind of more focused on that than kind of looking at what this place could give me as far as opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, oh, okay, like, I guess I'll see you around.
No one says no to the goo.
That's right. I gotta get a sticker made here for that.
Yeah.
Oxford pennant that says no one says no to the goo.
Get a pennant. Yeah. No one says no to the goo. Yeah.
Dave, if you're watching this.
Yeah, I marked that one.
Yeah, we're gonna need that. That's amazing.
What ended up happening though, and the part of it that I didn't tell the manager from here, is that I was actually going to get out of recording, because at the time I was like finishing college. My sessions, like I was getting some cool work, but they were few and far between. I was getting a lot more of the, hey, can you come in and, record a 12-year-old kid who's trying out to sing the national anthem at a minor league baseball game. And then the bands, it's like I would get a cool session, but it's like a friend's band. So it's like the bro rate. And it's, when I was finishing college, it's kind of like, well, is this what happens in life? Like you do some cool stuff, then you go get a job because you have a degree. And I was just really uncertain about what the future held. And that was also like the loyalty to the studio, but also the other reason is just I really didn't know what I was going to be doing 6 months after that phone call. And so end of that year, end of '08, it was probably between the holidays, between like Thanksgiving and, Christmas and New Year time. And the manager reached out to me one more time. He's like, "Hey man, I know you kind of said no, but the Goo Goo Dolls are taking off for the holidays and the studio's like literally wide open. I got to ask you one more time. Do you want to like come see the place? You could even bring a hard drive that's got some tracks on it and we could put it through some cool gear." And I was just like, yeah, you know what? I'll come take a look. I saw it on the cover of Mix magazine. I'll come see it in person. Like, thanks. I'll be there, in a couple days. So I came down and it was just like, it just knocked me out completely. I had never been in a space like this. My only experience was that high school recording studio and the first studio I was working in. I'd never been in any other facilities. So walking into a place that was quite literally renovated a year and a half before that and professionally designed, and the amount of outboard gear is more than impressive. I just couldn't even find the words. And we just talked about it.
Would you say it was you almost felt inspired by like the environment? I mean, that's because it sounds like it's a pretty, and I only stop you because that's, the first time anybody sets foot into like, a real like a super professional studio or whatever. I think if you're meant to be there and make music, something happens where it kind of just like, it elevates you in the same way that we grow up listening to records, and then that what we're actually doing is curating our threshold for quality and our taste preferences. And when you walk into a room like that, where everything is so thought out, each piece of gear, the layout, the acoustics, the visuals, something happens where you're like, oh, this is how it can be. And I think that's what you're describing, Jay, which is really powerful.
I'll tell you what, it's that, and it's a combination of just the opportunity and the consideration was inspirational because, I'm across town at a different studio. I'm just doing what I'm doing. And like I said, I kind of came up I didn't go to school for it or anything. I just kind of came up learning from other people. And just the fact that they were kind of like, hey, we heard these like 2 records that you did last year or this year, and we're just wondering if you want to come here and work here. It was powerful because like, around Buffalo, it's kind of like, the Goo Goo Dolls are like, all right,
right.
Everybody knows them. And it's just kind of like, they're the biggest success story in music, like them and Rick James. But so just to get the nod of like, hey, like, do you want to work here? We have this awesome studio. It was enough for me to be like, you know what, like, I'm going to figure this out. And so I came in January of '09 and I sat in on a handful of sessions, and I booked my first session here shortly after that, and made sure I had a friend's band who was very forgiving of my first day here. But it was like little things, like not little things. They had like a real Fairchild, and they had like the entire Telefunken mic collection, and like so I was trying to explain to this band like, hey, listen, like, this is a huge opportunity for me. Like, you don't got to pay me. Let's just rent the studio, and I just need to do something here just to see what happens.
Yeah, just don't complain to the studio manager, whatever you do.
Yes.
Yeah, just tell him it was awesome. Tell him we love Jay. Dude, what I love about that too, is maybe the second part of that you just kind of mentioned is just as important, maybe even more important, which is, their recognition of that and them extending that opportunity and that nod of confidence is maybe especially at a transitional point where I think a lot of musicians, people that are really want to work with bands, want to engineer, want to do that, but, get to a crossroads, especially around that like post-college age where they're just like, do I just hang it all up, go buy a cheap suit and just kind of do the thing or whatever, or like, how do I do that? And looking for a sign or whatever. I think what you described, and when I think myself, I know Tom, like everybody at some point, something, and or more, more importantly, somebody maybe who you look up to or whose work you respect, or in this case, the people that ran and owned that studio. Give a hint and a nod to what you're doing. And that alone just kind of says, oh, okay, well, I must be doing something well. If they believe in me, then why am I doubting believing in myself? And I think that's a huge thing where I see it with a lot of other bands that are just like, dude, you're doing great. And it's like, you don't need any like silver bullet, like secret. You just need to know that somebody else who you respect and with their trajectory and what they're doing creatively and professionally also thinks that, that you have something legitimate there, and sometimes it's as simple and small as that, as just, reaching out and saying, hey, we think you're doing a really good job over there. We'd love to have you over here and try that out. And I love that, because that sets up the rest of, the trajectory for your career and all of the different artists that now you've since worked with at that space, which is, where we're kind of getting to next. But I wanted to reinforce that point, because I remember being a kid and it's all just kind of feels like, yeah, none of that's like possible. That's kind of like getting like struck by lightning striking the same place twice, or like winning the lottery type stuff. But it really kind of starts with something that small, where somebody, it's like, maybe it's, you're a freshman coming in, and it's a senior in high school being like, yeah, that solo was pretty all right, kid. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is, or extrapolate that. So I love that so much, dude. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yes.
If you're an audio engineer or musician that's dedicated to creating and releasing new music consistently, then you already know that process can be long, complex, and often expensive, especially while you're trying desperately not to sacrifice the type of quality that is crucial for your mixes to stand up to those big budget productions. Producer and friend of the record process, Jay Moss, has reimagined these roadblocks to quality that plague us all. With the help of world-renowned sound engineers, Jay developed an AI-based platform called Master, which offers you the ability to quickly upload your song and receive a high-quality mastered edition in minutes, all at a price point that won't break the bank with each new mix revision. The platform also allows you to easily collect feedback from clients and collaborators, and it even caters to the perfectionist in us all by allowing you to quickly compare and contrast different iterations of each track as you make those final subtle tweaks. So for a limited time this season, you as a Record Process listener can not only try Master for free, but you can also receive a 20% discount on your first membership by using the code PROCESS on their website at checkout. So hit the link in our show notes or visit maastr.io for more info. So a lot of people think that Oxford Pennant makes, well, pennants. The triangular wool flag type things that usually have like a sports team's logo or the name of a place printed on them. Well, to be honest, that is what I thought too before my band, The Wonder Years, had the chance to work with them. Through that process, we realized just how much care they put into their beautifully crafted, iconic keepsakes that remind us who we are and why we do what we do. They've teamed up with some massive artists in the process, bands like My Chemical Romance, Wilco, and 21 Pilots, just to name a few. And they even offer custom shop orders for artists, companies, and unique events or special occasions. So please do yourself a favor and head over to oxfordpennant.com and use the code RECORD15 to receive 15% off your first retail purchase from their web store.
So get the keys to the car. You're in the car. You're driving 100 miles an hour, responsibly though. 100 miles.
Of course, always.
Yeah.
We're emotionally on the Autobahn here, so it's illegal.
Yeah. So, so I'm assuming the session went well, given that, I mean, we're talking to you and you had a session at 2 a.m. last night.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, like, I feel like that's a perfect segue to the record that we wanted to talk to you about. So, I mean, like, zoom up to last year with the Super American folks, also a Buffalo-based band. I guess, like, can you talk to us about, like, how you got involved with them and kind of paint that picture for us? So
Super American, like on paper, is really two members, Matt Cox and Pat Feely. And I've quite literally known and been working with both of them since they're 15.
Amazing.
And now they're both like right around 30.
So was that like that kind of like a like you acknowledging them, like as far as like how the studio manager kind of acknowledged you? Was it like that kind of capacity of like, hey, I see what you guys are doing?
Yeah, it was half and half. So I met Pat because the other studio I was working at, it was like the drummer's dad had recorded there, and he's like, "Oh, my son has a band," and like the chief engineer there was like, "I'm not working with 15-year-old kids," and I'm like, "Hey, I'll do it. They're kind of like pop punky, and like I'll totally do the session. Just give me a chance." So I did, and so that's when I met Pat, and like we had done, between that point and Super American, we had done probably 5 bands together. I did the records, and with Matt, it was he was kind of hanging out with a band that was a little bit older than him. Like the guys were closer to my age, and he was like the really young kid, but he could play, and he had an ear, and he didn't know it, but he could like write a hook. And I was like, man, like this kid's like really young, but he's super good. And so he was always kind of like around on these sessions with these older guys. And at one point, he finally got a chance to come here and record his own material. And the first thing he ever recorded here with me was an EP that we did completely live off the floor, with the exception of the vocals. And I'm like, okay, if this kid's like 15 or 15 or 16 at that time, and he's playing this well, like literally live, no punches, like there's something going on in him that, whether he acknowledges it or not, it's happening. So we've been really, really tight since then. And again, I've done a ton of records with him through various projects between then and now. And so when Matt started Super American, there was a slightly different lineup at the very beginning. Pat ended up joining after like the very first EP. I don't even think it's still online anywhere, but Pat ended up joining after the first EP we did, and got in on the second one. And it's been the two of them since the EP called Disposable. I've done like all their records for their existence. So yeah, been in with them for quite a while.
So there's a long-standing history before the band, just working just as musicians, as people, right? So there's that trust build up there. You have an understanding, a working dynamic. So let's talk about and you had done previous material. Was there anything different leading up to this then? Any conversations or the approach that they wanted to take, or things you wanted to try, that you kind of set out ahead of time when talking about, booking time and cutting this record?
Yeah, actually, it was pretty different from the previous LP that we did. The previous LP was called Tequila Sunrise, and there was a lot more of a variety of flavors on that record. The drum sounds had varied from 2 or 3 different kinds of acoustic drum sounds to drum machines, lots of different instrumentation, like mostly acoustics. And we were doing things on the previous record that it was the first time we did it in that band's existence. And for the record SUP, the conversations were kind of, hey, let's keep it simple, even to the point where typically where we'd be sprinkling in some like, extra harmonies and stacking things a little bit more, we kind of went towards, hey, you know what? Does it truly need that? Or are we just doing that because we've done that in the past? So there's, on SUP, there's a few tracks that, actually there's a song called Hot Dog. I remember very specifically us being in and like doing the vocals and writing harmonies and mapping, like, do we actually need these? And it's like, they're cool, but they're really not serving anything in the song. They're just there. And we ended up kind of stripping some things back, but it went back to our conversations of when we were planning the record of, hey, let's just kind of keep it a little bit more simple and just get big tones, get the correct tones, and get a feel. And we don't have to fill every inch of this out with something. Let's just kind of go more on the strengths of the song and getting them to feel right.
Yeah, that's so what an incredible point to think about, because I think it's, we always talk about all the, having all the tools and amassing the tools, whether that be knowledge or actual gear, across a career, right? So in this case, you had formed and experimented and came out of the last release with a lot of tools, and I think that's really wise to go ahead and say, we don't need to use all of them, right? Just because we can, number one. And number two, hey, and I see this a lot too, and I'm sure you have over the years, getting a session that's maybe, engineered or put together by a younger, very green band, figuring out, and there's 10 tracks of rhythm guitar because they're that's how you get a massive rhythm guitar sound, right? And spoiler, not necessarily here. You just get it right and get a really solid tone and capture of that through through a really decent chain with a great player. And that's how, and you only need one for each side, and it can be huge. Just let the drum space come through, let the vocal really, come through it and have a weight. So I think that's awesome that y'all had kind of put those limitations up front and said, hey, are we doing this? The vocal harmony thing, Jay, is a huge thing. Cause I think I've seen that play out plenty of times where we're just trying to find a line that works. Nothing's really fitting perfectly. And then all of a sudden, I kind of just be like, are we just putting something here to feel better about the fact that we put something here? Or is it because it really feels like it's missing without it? Then you go back, play the whole section through. You're like, yeah, I think we just wanted to do it because we felt like that's how we knew that we threw everything at the wall and we're finished, so that's really good having that perspective going in. And I think that's probably, having that conversation too, because they had tried some stuff on the previous record. So they didn't feel like, well, we don't know what we don't know, which is also when you're young, you want to try every trick you've seen somebody do on YouTube, and the real art in that and the real wisdom, I think, is knowing the correct time and place to put some of those things into play. So that's awesome. I love that approach. So cool, that y'all had that foresight and lead into it. So what did it, when you put it on the calendar, take us from there, take us into the sessions then, and let's talk about what the songs look like when they came to the studio and what the first steps were.
The SUP record is the one that, it was literally the last thing I started tracking before the world shut down for the pandemic, and the first thing we got back into when we were allowed to come back here. I know the dates were different depending on where people were in the world, but I remember we tracked the drums for SUP, and then the studio closed for 4 months for the pandemic. And I remember during that time, it was just it was always 2 weeks. And at one point in time, we just took all the dates off the calendar. I know the guys in the band, they'd still kind of just, they stayed sharp, practiced at their apartments and stuff. They did what they could. And they were the first ones back once we were allowed to have people in the building again. So it was just really I know it was just the drums, but it was an old time versus the present day kind of a thing. That was a thing where when we got back in the room, we were just so grateful to be back here. And I think maybe some of that feeling that you try to get into a song was literally pure down to our souls of just being grateful to be healthy. And we kind of got through a little bit of this, and we were able to come back in here and do what we had started doing. We did it under all the protocols that were in place, masks, a number of people, and constant, sanitizing everything. But we were just grateful to be back in here doing what we wanted to do to begin with. So I think there's a little bit of that in the record, and it kind of gave us the ability to maybe complete the demos a little bit more. Some of the songs that maybe needed a little bit more, working on some vocal patterns and, seeing what sticks as far as some of those harmonies we were talking about. Hey, here's a demo with the harmonies, here's a demo without the harmonies. They're very, very good at completing multiple versions of demos to prepare not only for the recordings, but just to kind of explore things that, how you just need time to explore an idea. They're very, very good at just doing that at home or in their practice space, and delivering me, whether it's a Dropbox folder or whatever it is, of demos, updated demos, and just kind of what we're coming in with for ideas. So I could be more prepared. And if I have an idea, we all kind of know what to expect coming in. So it kind of allowed for them and us as a group to complete some of that stuff with the downtime. So we did get back in and we were able to be more productive.
That's awesome. I mean, it's interesting, you talk about, especially in the creative field, talk about, a lot of times hindsight can be 20/20. In this way, the fact that you had started had the drums cut, it gave a bit of that time. And interestingly enough, that they, made it extremely productive because they had already broke ground on these songs, and it wasn't the classic, okay, what am I going to write in a pandemic,
Right.
and do I even feel like it? They had their sights kind of tuned up, and they could dive back into some of that and then come back many, many months later with that objectivity of no, we tried it out to the drums, mind you, and and had those foundations. So I think that alone is a really interesting, turn of events that probably can be seen as a positive. While there were obviously many negatives and probably had its own, challenges recording still in the midst of a pandemic. Obviously, we all went through that, trying to stay masked, trying to stay distance, all of those things. But I do love that kind of that you had already started it beforehand, so they could feel like they were still carving their way at, making the best sound decisions. Did they? I mean, so it sounds like it was productive for them in that way. And all of you, when you got back together in the studio, were there anything that, on the other side of that, though, it's a lot of time to sit with something as opposed to, being in there and saying, hey, we're here for this many weeks. Don't overthink it. No, we got it when it feels great. And then and let's keep moving on and kind of committing in the moment. That's also, tough, and probably good that it just stopped with the drums, because if they had too much time to sit on half of the record, right, maybe it would have been different. What do you think? Did you sense any of that? Or
What I think it was they really, leading up to when we were doing the drums, they had spent months, with writing and demoing and rewriting and redemoing, that they had a pretty good idea of where they wanted to go with this one. And so when we got in to do the drums, it was more like we were adjusting some tempos on the fly and things like that, and coaching on some of the fills and parts like that. But they kind of knew what they wanted, and the thing that was really actually pretty impressive, like looking back on it now, like having this conversation, was they still kept their eyes on the prize, like during all the downtime, and they used the time to be productive with that same goal. They weren't trying to reinvent the wheel just because now they had time. They're like, well, how can we make these better, or just better prepare ourselves, so when we get in there, we're performing to the best of our abilities? I mean, you know how it is, man, like firsthand, once you start playing those songs on tour, the comfort that you get, that you've performed them, 100 nights this year, from when you were tracking them in the studio, there's just that little bit of like swagger that you play with and perform with. I think they got some of that going during that downtime. And that's just from the repetition. And again, if there's like little subtle tweaks that they wanted to make that wasn't so structural, but it's like a performance thing, that was something that I think that's what it allowed them to do. So yeah, we didn't really shift gears too much. I think it came together just right, where they didn't overthink. They thought just enough. And we took that energy and brought it back into the songs when we were allowed to.
That's awesome. I mean, and they did, so they didn't, you're also a kind of like, even just from like thinking about this from a guitar playing standpoint, right? They had some time, but they channeled that time, practicing and kind of going through the songs and playing, but also to make some of those like character and style decisions, if anything, that you only really get after your band has like done a couple full US tours of playing that song every night. And you're like, oh, every night I kind of end up doing this, or like I kind of end up bailing out on this and doing like a stupid, silly harmony, right. Or whatever, my other guitar players end up, just like pinch harmonic wars at a transition or something. You know what I mean? Like some of that, probably having been able to kind of like play through them in terms of preparing, probably landed on the record, that a lot of that stuff doesn't always get baked into it right at the start. If you're just like, hey, we wrote these and now we're going in to capture them in their like initial written draft form, So I think that's probably a really good point too, Jay. That's it's pretty interesting. Yeah. And the record feels that way. It feels like it has style, and it obviously was, shooting to feel like a band in a room and that energy. But yeah, it's like there's a difference between that and very like static, kind of like one-dimensional performances. Like, okay, that's there, and then something that feels like it has character behind, the thing as a whole, which I really like.
So, like, I mean, y'all got the record tracked, and it's all it's all there. It's all on the hard drive. Reading the credit list, it seemed like you got mixed up with some of our friends. So I guess
familiar suspects.
Yeah,
I can pick them out of a lineup, no problem.
So I kind of wanted to get in, like, they through all of the records that you have done with Super American, like you have their trust, and I think that's a big part of that relationship. So extending that trust circle outside of you, how did that come about? How'd that happen?
So that was a group decision, and I kind of felt like it was time to kick the mixes up a bit and get a different look. And they were the three of us, Matt, Pat, and myself, were talking about it, and I just said, hey, like, would you guys be cool if I contacted my buddy Vince to see if he would have any interest in mixing it, and B, like, what's life looking like right now during the pandemic? And he was setting up his new room at the time, and they're like, yeah, like, they're like, we love his work, and they're really big fans of actually a bunch of records that he's worked on and mixed. And so I reached out to Vince Ratti, and I just kind of said, hey man, like, Vince and I had worked on a handful of records before. We had done a record with Save Face. I tracked it, he mixed it. We did a Pentimento EP. We did an acoustic Menzinger's single for Anna. We did like a flexi disc together. So we had a pretty good relationship, and we knew each other well enough to have those conversations. And he was on board right away, and he's like, yeah, this is great. I just got some new gear, and this will be like the first or second thing I mix on it. Yeah. So the band had, trusted that I said, hey, Vince has my trust, and he does amazing work. And so Matt and Pat felt great about that. Got linked up with Vince on the project, and I remember getting like the first mixes back, because at the time, again, it was like we're all sitting in separate cars, listening, right. And we all had like the same reaction. We're like, oh my, this is incredible. It sounds wide, and it sounds powerful. And he just took everything that we had listed under our wishes, and he just did that, times 10. It was great. And I was fortunate enough to get multiple things sent back to me from Vince over the years, but this by far was the one that just kind of knocked me out of my seat the most. And just getting the band's reaction was so worth it. And so Vince had such a big hand in just the way this record hits.
Yeah.
And so just love his work.
What a gem. Vince Ratti, true friend of my band and so many other mutual friends of ours, and a Record Process alum. He has our heart always. And so this is actually a really, really interesting opportunity, because when we had him on the show a while ago, we talked about a record from much earlier on in his career that he did with my band, Wonder Years. And obviously we've done a lot since. So this was more of a obviously a recent record that he has mixed, and you having that kind of existing working relationship, passing things off to him as an engineer to someone to finish off the mix journey. As Tom put it, that's a really big extension of trust. What does that handoff look like, and has it changed from you And maybe this is a really cool opportunity too, because you've engineered for so many different bands and projects out of a studio that has a lot of great gear. So you're obviously baking in some of those sounds and effects, and you have a vision there with the band that knows what they kind of want as well. Talk to us about that handoff for anybody that's maybe less familiar about, where that role ends as an engineer, in the studio, and what that pass off looks like to a mixing engineer to finish and complete that vision, right?
For sure. And again, I've been really, really fortunate over the years to have a similar situation with a number of different mix engineers. And again, it comes back to what Tom had brought up with trust. And the thing I'll add to that is I don't have an ego when it comes to that stuff. For me, it's more about serving the project and serving the band and what the vision is for it. For SUP, if Super American's like, hey Jay, we want to have you mix it, I 1,000,000% would have done it. And actually, I mixed the last track on the record, "How Big Is Your Brain?" I mixed that one, but it's just kind of like we had these conversations of like, hey, should we explore this? And it's like you see the stars aligning, and it's just like, wait, Vince is like a buddy of mine, and it's just an opportunity to maybe, like I said, take it up to the next level. But he's also the right person who would serve the idea and the vision and the project the way it should have been. You could list a number of mix engineers, like huge time engineers. It doesn't make them the right one for the project just because they did another record whatever year that you like. You got to really like listen to what's going on, and listen to what you have, because you can't just be like, oh, Green Day, American Idiot. I did this record here with, a very, very small budget compared to that one. I'm going to send it to this guy. It's going to be the same.
Yeah.
It's not, as we all know, it's not like that. So Vince is just somebody who I trusted absolutely. And part of the process, like I said, I don't have an ego about that. So I didn't have a problem, shopping around or helping them find the right person. And just so happened with a personal connection, those conversations came very easily. Because it's just like, hey, shoot him a text or an email, whatever I did at first, and loop the band in and see how they're feeling about it. And, the stars aligned on that one. And the same thing could be said for a number of other bands that I have tracked and helped them find the proper mix engineer for the project. And I do, a fair amount of like hardcore as well. And, there's a couple engineers who it's like, any of them would do a great job, but like what engineer in their process do you think would serve our vision the best? And can we connect those dots? And are they interested in what you're working on? And so that's the part of it that I kind of, anytime we go through this process of finding a mix engineer, not that I'm like, the final filter in this process, but it's like, I want to make sure I am looking out for the best interests of the band and the project itself. That just comes with, being as cool as you can about passing it off, and whoever you're passing it off to, making sure you're covering all the bases for them as well. Like, don't leave them hanging on something that you wouldn't want to receive yourself.
Yeah. Don't put in like trapdoors and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Because I think that's an interesting thing too, is kind of, without doing a full, and maybe we do this at some point down the line, but without doing a full, like, in-session dive and walkthrough, what does that look like? Because I know what we've sent Vince, even as recently as our newest record. But for this, I think sometimes there's a mystery of like, what does it sound like pre-mix and post-mix, with someone like that? And one thing that you also already mentioned that kind of draws a parallel to another interview we did recently, more specifically talking about gear, is the gear itself is not necessarily the important thing or the piece of gear. It's the relationship and the love you have for it, and that makes it the right piece of gear. And I think the same kind of goes in an interesting parallel for, the right person for each part of that process. And it's a two-way street, right? Like, just because someone's really good at what they do, I think you hit it on the head, it doesn't mean that they're the right person for that band or the best person for that band. I think there has to be a mutual respect, and they have to, kind of like, it has to pull at their heart creatively to be able to give themselves fully to it as well. And knowing who those people might be and say, hey, I've got something for you to listen to. We have this Super American record. I think you're really going to like it. check it, here's a song, and then having Vince be like, oh, absolutely, I would love to put this. I already have some ideas for how, what I want to do here, and how I might approach it. So I think that's a really big part of the puzzle too, and very well put. But so all that being said, before we wrap up here, and obviously it was then, we can't not mention that it was mastered by another Philly alum in our community, Mr. Will Yip. So Vince and Will work together on a lot of stuff, obviously, and Will's got a great ear, and I think there's some sort of voodoo, like, the universe has those two intertwined now, that kind of like share a brain almost, creatively, and really get each other and working on each other's work. So that helps a lot too. But what when you pass along the sessions, just give for anybody that might be curious, whether it's a band trying to do some home recording, or, a band that's going into the studio, with an engineer like yourself, in this capacity, and are going to come out, what should they look for to pass along, to set up an engineer the best they can?
For sure. There's actually a lot of basics, properly labeling tracks, making sure that you've done your edits and you've consolidated the clips, everything's lined up properly. You're not leaving them with bad edits, or you're not leaving them with any of the editing work to still do. Making sure that anytime I pass off like a Pro Tools session, I'm not just sending stems. I always make sure that the Pro Tools session has some sort of balance. So when they open it up for the first time, if they just hit play, it kind of sounds how we left it in the room, or how we want it to feel leaving the room.
It's like your rough board mix. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a board mix. I would say it's not even like a pre-mix. It's just kind of like, how it is when you're working. You just want to make sure you're hearing it accurately. Like, if I was going to receive it and I hit play just to see what I'm walking into, I wouldn't want to have to spend 10 minutes just finding a balance so I could hear what's going on. So I find that kind of goes a long way. Things even like, before you're kind of printing down your tracks, making sure you got like proper fades, and you're not leaving a situation where you're like emailing, you're on the phone, you're trying to explain to the mix engineer about like, oh no, like that is supposed to fade out differently and faster or slower. And they're like, well, why didn't you do that before you sent it?
Yeah.
So I know it doesn't seem like huge things, but these all add up.
That's right.
To this bigger picture here that, you got to think about what you would want to receive if you were mixing it. But I always find that if you do all those things, you keep it nice and neat, and you've paid a lot of attention during the tracking process. You're not giving them some sort of like rescue and recovery mission. You got things clipping and stuff. As long as you're doing all the basics properly and it's nice and neat, they're always appreciative and don't really come back at you and say, hey, like, what am I supposed to do here? It's a mess. So yeah, just making sure you do the basics, you do them well.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't leaving those decisions. Don't keep pushing them down the line if you can handle them at your point in the process. I think that's kind of what what you're saying there, and I will reframe that. I've always the records that we've made with my band and others, like, try to keep that commit mentality, even though in the digital realm there's usually a way back if you want it. That's a great point where it's just like, hey, if you want that guitar like ring out to decay slower or a little faster, don't just save that and then be like, assume that they are going to mix the tracks exactly as they are, and so anything like that you can just foolproof is great and is very good, and very helpful, and helps them focus on, especially when you get to the revision stuff, the stuff that's more fun, to be like, yo, can you give me a little bit more hair on the vocal? Can you give me a little bit more air, in the guitar, in those things, instead of being like, okay, first of all, that's a bad vocal edit. Sorry. Can you fix that? Which some things sneak through, but yes, generally speaking, if you can take care of it at your point in the process, that's great. And that goes for the band as well. They were writing and practicing and understanding how they wanted to attack the performances. They were taking care of that before they got into the studio and in that capture point in the process. So it all goes a long way, and it is the sum of that exact process. So Jay, this has been great, dude. We really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through your journey and the journey that brought you to making such a cool record like this with Super American. So thank you very much for that, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to meeting officially here over the webcams. And yeah. So thanks for bringing me on.
Amazing. Thanks, Jay.
Yeah, and I'll have to stop in there at some point when the next time we come through Buffalo. I can't. It's surprising that I have not yet set foot in the stew, but I'd be excited to do that. So
yeah, we're close to everything downtown, and just a few blocks from our friends at Oxford Pennant.
Hey,
that's right. Hey. Jay offered us a ton of great food for thought in there, but I wanted to zero in on one very specific quality that I think has made Jay so successful and has an impact on everything he does. The fact that he is so very selfless as an engineer, as a producer, and just in general as a creative ally with the artists that he works with. I think it's an important lesson to ask yourself this question in the studio. Does this idea serve the song? Or does it serve my ego? Because producers, engineers, managers, tours, they will come and go, but the songs cemented on these records are gonna live on and on and on. So I think it's imperative to choose people around you when going into the studio that don't have ulterior motives, that aren't trying to imprint their template on you as an artist, and aren't trying to ultimately just use your art and your project as a means to further their own ideals and their own career. The truth is that nobody will ever care as much about your art as you do. So you're looking for the closest second. You're looking for the people that are open and upfront about what they'll get out of it too, what attracts them to the project. And do your best not to let name recognition or a collaborator's previous credits obscure your judgment when building a team. Just because they are right for another artist does not mean that they are the best choice for you and your current situation. So arm yourself with better questions and let your gut decide if they truly care about the vision at hand. So keep all that in mind, and until next time, thanks for joining us here on The Record Process.